Are you looking for fragrant, spring-blooming shrubs for your yard or garden? Fairy magnolias and the new Daphne perfume princess blanket themselves in loads of fragrant blooms each spring. Fairy magnolias grow quickly to a compact 9 to 12 foot tall bush and are available in blush pink, white, and cream. Award-winning Daphne perfume princess blooms earlier than most daphnes and covers itself with an astonishing profusion of large flowers, not just at each branch tip, but also along each stem. Both of these award-winning shrubs are from Anthony Teslar plants, and as with all Teslar plants, they are easy care, requiring minimal maintenance for maximum performance. Visit teslar.com for more information. That's TESSELAAR.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who simply love plants.
But not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm associate editor at Fine Gardening Magazine.
Hey everybody, it's Danielle. I'm the executive editor here at Fine Gardening Magazine, and we are hurtling quickly towards the end of spring. It feels like spring started yesterday, Carol, but yet we are hurtling towards the end of spring now, closing in on some May dates. And today we have a topic that I just said, who the heck picked this topic? Spring flowering dwarf shrubs. Carol, why did we pick this topic?
Because it was the hardest one we could think of. I don't know. I actually have a few, but I've already covered them on the pod before, so it's kind of tricky.
I know. I have a few too, and I went back into like the archives of my mind, but I feel like, we think spring, right? So we think ephemerals and super early perennials and bulbs, but we don't really think of anything with like bulk and heft, right? Besides like the ubiquitous forsythia or, perhaps, the ubiquitous, like, I don't know, colquitzia, another spring, but those are giants, those are huge shrubs. And I feel like, what you've got going on at that lower layer is small bulbs and small perennials. And then what are you filling in the gap of interest for? So, in my mind, we probably just threw this out there, but when I started thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, these small dwarf shrubs add value to the spring garden.
Yes, absolutely. And I think all of them would go well in containers. Having a smaller shrub means that you can do an early container display, tuck some bulbs in maybe, but you've got something that'll really hold that spot, and it doesn't mind the frost as long as we still have it. So yeah.
That's such an excellent idea. That's so true. Woodies do great in containers, and particularly dwarf woodies are great in containers. So I love that it's super ubiquitous. So, all right, tell me, is your first shrub, can it go either way? Can it go into the garden and into a container?
Yes, absolutely. And I have quite a few blueberries. Not all of them are dwarfs, but I have a few that are dwarfs, and they're great container plants. They're from that bushel and berry series, which were designed kind of as patio plants, I think. But mine are in the ground. They love it in the ground. They love it in containers. They stay nice and small. I have a few. I'm going to do two because I've got one for the north and I've got one for the south.
I love it.
Yeah, and they both work in the north, but the one you will get berries in the south with the second one. So the first one is Perpetua. Okay. That is Vaccinium Oris 61-1.
Oh, that rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it?
A lovely name, yes. But everyone calls it Perpetua, and that is hardy from zones 4 to 8. And it gets about 4 feet tall and wide, they say. Mine is holding at about 2.5 feet tall. It's nice and compact. And I'm not sure, maybe eventually could get as big as 4 feet tall. But for me, it has stayed nice and small, like moist, well-drained soil. Blueberries prefer acidic soil. So if you don't have acidic soil, you may need to amend. And I I love the blueberries, of course, but I love the spring flowers. They're gorgeous. They're like little white pieris flowers. In fact, when I see a pieris in bloom, I always think of like what a disappointing blueberry that is, because it's not going to make berries later. But with these blueberries, you get the early white spring flowers. Bumblebees love them, and the birds love the berries later. So it's a wildlife plant. And you can also eat the berries, so that's fun. Reportedly, Perpetua, you're supposed to be able to get a second crop. So you get that main
Oh.
crop with the spring flowers and summer berries, and then it reblooms a little and gives you a few more berries later in the season, more like fall. I don't know that mine has done that for me, and it may just be that the birds are getting to the berries before I am, but it's right in a place where I see it every day. I don't know, but that is one of the benefits of this cultivar is that it does rebloom. Um, the problem for people in the South is it needs at least 1,000 chill hours. That's hours below
Oh,
45
wow.
degrees. And, so that's hard to achieve if you're, deeper into the South. So if that's where you are, there's another one called Blueberry Buckle. That one only needs 350 chill hours.
Oh my gosh,
Much
what a difference.
Yeah, much easier to accomplish. Hardy from zone 6 to 10. So, you can push right down into Florida, I'm guessing, with this one. It's a smaller plant, only gets 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. Mine is like 2 feet tall after 5 years. This one would, fit even better into a container. You could actually fit other things in there with it. Teeny little leaves that look like boxwood, and then little dark colored berries that sort of go all season long, as far as I can tell. So if you're in the South, this is one that might work for you.
I love the name too, Blueberry Buckle. I
Yeah.
mean, if anybody knows me, they know that I am a complete sweetaholic. Would you give up alcohol, cheese, or sweets? I would give up alcohol and cheese without a problem, but I'm never giving up my sweets. And oh my gosh, you said Blueberry Buckle, and I was like, oh, I'm really hungry. That's awesome. Yeah, I can't even believe I didn't do a blueberry because I have jelly bean, which I think is also part of that bushel and berry series. That was one of the first ones. And again, yeah, a dwarf blueberry blooming right now in my garden and teeny tiny little shiny leaves like a boxwood. It's just adorable. So those were two really, really good choices. I think I'm going to have a hard time following up with that. So all right, I'm gonna give you something whose name has something edible in it for my first shrub, but I have Yuki Cherry Blossom Deutzia. And that's Deutzia. All right, ready? This is another one that rolls off the tongue. NCDX2. Whatever. Zones 5 to 8, just know it as Yuki Cherry Blossom Deutzia. And I feel like Deutzias have gotten like a bad rap. They've kind of have fallen into that one hit wonder category of shrubs that people are like, man, it's just like forsythia. All it does is bloom a little bit in the spring and then it just looks like bleh the rest of the year. But they're not. And they've done a lot of breeding with them. And this is a more recent cultivar, recent being like a decade. It only gets 2 by 2, so 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide. Full sun to partial shade, lean, well-drained, crappy soil. So really, a tough as nails shrub for my hospital hill or down by the mailbox, gets hit by the snowplow. This guy's going to come back again. I actually planted this shrub because it's really hard to sell at the garden centers and nurseries, right? So it's got that, window of opportunity where it's in bloom and then it goes out of bloom. So it's often something that will sit on nursery shelves for a while. And I worked at a nursery where the shrubs that were left over always got thrown into the display gardens. Well, I threw a Yuki Cherry Blossom into this display garden at a garden center I worked at many, many years ago. And I still catch flack from the owner because every time it comes into bloom in the display gardens, customers want to know what it is. What is it? Where is it? Can I get it? And, oftentimes they're not carrying it or they don't have it in stock anymore. So yeah, it's a stunner because it's got these beautiful bell-shaped, bright pink flowers. The outside of the blossom is dark pink, the inside is light pink, and then you've got a little bit of yellow on the inside as well. So it's just these showers of bell flowers. Kind of reminds me of a styrax. Looks like a snow bell. And then the leaves of Yuki cherry are long, lance-like, about an inch long, bright green. The stems are dark purple, which adds another component to this shrub, so it doesn't just look like a green blob for the rest of the year. And it gets really beautiful burgundy red fall color. So, it kind of morphs into almost looking like a miniature 9-bark once you hit those fall cooler temperatures. So it has it's 2 by 2, but it can really have a almost cascading appearance. So it's great on the edge of a garden, kind of cascading over a wall or something like that. But we'll also just make, kind of this nice little rounded tuffet too. So, I'm going to give a shout out to Deutzia's. I think they've done a lot of good work with making them more interesting to last beyond the spring. There's some variegated versions out there now too for their foliage, but Yuki Cherry Blossom is a winner for sure. All right, Carol, so you started us off with a really big bang. Those blueberries are going to be hard to beat, but what's your next shrub? Dwarf spring flowering.
Okay. So I might have stretched the definition of dwarf a little. I saw that in the show notes we are talking that it needs to stay under 4 feet tall. Dwarf red-leaved sand cherry gets a little bit bigger than that. Just a
You
little
could
bit.
always prune it, right?
Yeah, and the deer do. Like
Okay.
I don't need to prune this one. The deer they keep it in check for me. This is Prunus cistina, and it's Prunus X cistina. It is a hybrid it's a really old hybrid. It was developed from Prunus pumila, which is a United States, northeastern United States native. And then that was crossed with Prunus sesserifera ultrapurpurea, which is a hybrid with genetics from like Western Asia and Caucasia. So South Dakota State University developed this back in like 1910, and it's a red-leafed, as you would imagine, sand cherry, which related to cherries that we're familiar with, has the same shape of leaf, but with a beautiful burgundy color to the leaf.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get up to 5 feet tall and wide. Mine is 3 feet tall, and that's again because the deer will not leave it alone. And I somehow cannot manage to spray it with deer spray in time to prevent that. But it does stay nice compact size. And the spring flowers, they come out just after the new leaves, and so you have these dark, tiny little leaves that have just emerged, and then white flowers with a dark center. And it's so charming. And the first time I saw this, I was at a hotel. It was in the little detention basins in the middle of the parking lot that they're doing now. Instead of the great big one, they'll do like little rain gardens in between the parking spots. And they had this planted in there. And it was so cool that when I got back from that trip, I went to the nursery looking for it and figured out that it was this dwarf sand cherry. And as you can imagine, if it's in the like parking lot hell strip, that they're pretty tough. They like moist, acidic, well-drained soil. They do not like to dry out. That is one downside. But other than that, really quite adaptable to soil texture. They're hardy from zones 2 to 8. 2, folks.
Yeah.
Like you can grow this one on the tundra, evidently. I guess. And more than one source said it. Like sometimes there'll be one that says, oh yeah, zone 2, but everybody seems to feel like this one is that hardy. I think it's just a charming filler that goes well with other plants. It gives you a color that you don't really see as much at that time of year with the burgundy. And and it's one that I actually grow, which was hard for me to find, one that a dwarf spring flowering shrub that I actually grow.
And that
But
you haven't
this is
talked about before,
and
right?
that I
Because I
haven't
feel
talked
like
about
this is
before.
new. This is new. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an awesome plant. This is one of my parents' favorite plants, actually, to plant down by their summer shore house, because it's very salt tolerant too. I can add that to it. It is very salt tolerant, which I guess you would assume based on the fact that it's a sand cherry. It's got sand cherry in it, but so beautiful, and really like that contrast of that dark foliage with that light blossom is just shockingly gorgeous. I'm giggling because you said, the detention, and I didn't know where you were going with that. I'm like, did she stay at a detention center for her like hotel stay? You totally threw me off. I'm like, wow, I don't remember that photo shoot, Carol.
I was really bad.
It was not great. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a good one. So give me the botanic name again for the sand cherry.
Prunus existina.
Existina. Okay.
Yeah.
And zones 2 to 8. So, those
8.
lone zone 2 listeners, we threw you a bone this time around. Well, I'm going to give you a zone 3. So close. And I'm going to do Baby Kim Lilac, which is Syringa SMNSDTP, whatever. Anyway, it's Baby Kim Lilac, and it's zones 3 to 8. And think of this as the baby to Miss Kim, the very popular Miss Kim dwarf lilac. However, I didn't do Miss Kim because Miss Kim still gets 6 by 6. That lilac gets pretty big and tall unless you're pruning it, but compared to a regular lilac that can get 12 feet tall, a common lilac, I guess, Kim is still a dwarf, but Baby Kim is only going to get 3 by 3. The other thing that I really like about Baby Kim Lilac is that it keeps its purple blossom color. Miss Kim tends to, as it ages, those, purple fragrant panicles that you're used to with a lilac, those go white. They kind of bleach out, which is fine, if that's the look you're going for. But I really, always think, I want the normal version of a lilac, the common purple lilac in a baby package. And Baby Kim is really where it's at. I think everybody knows a lilac has, silver kind of bark, which I think is kind of attractive, especially in the winter when it's completely, lost all its leaves. And then it gets these beautiful, like spade-like green glossy leaves that are just really, really lovely. Nothing to write home about when it's not in flower, but a decent looking shrub that kind of holds its own in that, midway range, a little bit bigger than the perennials, not crazy huge. It's got obviously those fragrant light pink flowers, or light purple, flowers, which are just gorgeous. I love that I have seen a lot of dwarf lilacs that are only getting in the 3 by 3 to 4 by 4 range. I love that I've seen a lot of them used recently in gardens that I visited as small hedging, almost as like a boxwood or a privet replacement. Boxwoods are getting the boxwood blight. Privets are highly invasive in a lot of areas of the country. So what an awesome alternative. Like even if you're doing Miss Kim 6 by 6, you're getting that hedgerow look. And lilacs take to these hedging lilacs, these dwarf lilacs, take to pruning very, very easily. I think the only thing that you're sacrificing, of course, is that evergreen component. But, if you get a tightly packed in hedgerow of dwarf lilacs, it really does still give you some visual separation because it's a very tightly dense branched plant. So you've really still got some structure going on, even if it's not evergreen. But I'm a huge fan. There's a lot of dwarf lilacs out there. I've grown Tinkerbell too, which is another micro dwarf lilac that's got bright pink flowers. So if you're still into that kind of area and you like a lilac, but you're not keen on purple, Tinkerbell's a really nice one too. But Carol, have you ever grown any of these dwarf lilacs that have really come into their own the last 10, 15 years or so?
I have not. And it's not because I don't like them. It's just I don't know. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah. I feel like I want to get a couple more into the mix because there really is. It's one of those iconic flowers, right? You know, roses, peonies, lilacs, foxglove. You know, it's all in that cottage garden motif. And yeah, lilacs. There's nothing like that fragrance. It's
Yes.
really stunning.
Yes. It sends you back to like childhood if you had
Yeah.
lilacs in your, life when you were a child. Yeah. Amazing.
All right, Carol. I can't wait to see what's on tap next. What do you got for me?
Okay. So now we're venturing into the things I have not grown yet.
Okay.
Okay. And it's kind of funny. You had mentioned how ubiquitous forsythia is, and you're like, it's the
Yes.
one plant that people think of when you say spring flowering shrubs. But as we all know, that usual forsythia is like monstrous and it will like take over an entire bed and then it'll make advances on your lawn. Um, and it's definitely not a dwarf shrub, right? But there is a dwarf variety called sugar baby forsythia. That's Forsythia ex intermedia. Nimbus is the species name and a cultivar name, and it's hardy from zones 5 to 8, so reasonably hardy over like most of the country. And it stays 18 to 30 inches tall and wide. Similar habit to the giant behemoths that it's related to, like a fountain or a vase shape, narrow at the bottom, a little wider at the top, but just packed with those golden yellow blooms before the leaves emerge, before most other things are blooming in the spring. I think of it as an Easter flower, the forsythia, because depending when Easter falls, like you can usually have some cut and to bring inside for that fun color. And I like forsythias. They are brutish, but I have one that sort of just holds its own out near the road. I don't have to think about it. It's got the fun color. Then you just forget about it the rest of the year. But with this one, you could sprinkle this in and you get more like pops of color rather than like one giant splash. You can spread them around in the landscape, combine them with other things that maybe have a different early spring color. But this one, I learned about it because it was in Mark Wethington's article from issue 202, Shrubs for Small Spaces. And I'll throw a link to that article into the show notes so that, if folks are getting a hankering for these little shrubs, these adorable little shrubs. He had, some spring flowering, but also others that flower, have different seasons of interest throughout the season. Yeah, so Mark had a good tip for pruning too. This is one that you really don't have to prune. If you're going to do it, though, just a few stems all the way back to the ground once a year. And usually people recommend pruning a spring blooming shrub after it blooms. But he says, why not cut it in late winter, up to a month before it blooms, bring the stems inside, and they will bloom ahead of schedule. And so
Oh,
you
I
can
love that
enjoy.
tip.
Isn't that fun? Yeah. So he's like, if you're going to prune anyway, you might as well enjoy it. So I thought that was a fun tip for this one.
I love that. I love that idea. I think it's awesome. Yeah. And I love the idea too of a forsythia that stays in check. Like, I have a forsythia too, but here's the thing, like I made the mistake of doing some major pruning to it to get it into shape, threw the clippings into my compost bin, and I ended up with lots of forsythia babies that have, kind of tried to take over a certain corner of the of the property where my compost is, and I've been fighting them ever since. So I would say, yeah, I'm all about a forsythia pop of color. You talked about it being an Easter flower, and some of my earliest childhood memories is Easter egg hunts underneath the forsythia because they get so large that when you're a little kid, it's like instant fort. But yeah, those big guys, just be careful with the pruning because yeah, you probably want to just bag up those prunings and those clippings because they really do. They take root very, very easily, very easily. But yeah, sugar baby sounds delightful. And I was trying to remember, I'm like, wow, where do I know that from? Oh, Mark's article. Yes, so definitely we'll share that on the show notes. Everybody knows the drill by now. Please don't get into an accident writing down all of these plant names. We put the plant list and their photos all online on finegardening.com. Hit that podcast tab and you'll be able to see all the show notes that we're talking about. All right, so you talked about like pushing the envelope with, sizing and what you were going to consider a dwarf shrub. I'm pushing the envelope of maybe a perennial that behaves like a shrub. Well, all right, so I guess technically tree peonies are considered shrubs. And then we've got herbaceous peonies, which are considered nothing but a straight up perennial. But then we've got these Itoh or Itoh peonies, which are a cross between the two of them and behave much like both of those peonies. So I'm going to talk about an Itoh peony, a more recent one that I have purchased, which is Cora Louise Itoh peony. And it's zones 4 to 9. These Itoh peonies are really hardy. I can't stress enough that we've even had people from zone 3 write in and say, oh no, I grow them there. Now that's anecdotal. They are technically zones 4 to 9. But this is a peony that behaves like a shrub. I mean, it really does. It's no staking required. The Itoh peonies have a very massive structure that can be 3 by 3 up to 4 by 4 that require no staking whatsoever, and they hold these massive, gorgeous blooms. Cora Louise, the variety Cora Louise, is a single peony, so it's got these beautiful, it's cup-like, and it has this beautiful light pink, sometimes translates as white in full sun, outer petal, and then on the inside it has this boss of dark magenta, reddy pink with yellow stamens, and it is just spectacular. And it's not, the rare occurrence where there's a couple of blooms here and there. This, I'm going to call it a shrub. This shrub gets completely covered with blooms. You're getting dozens of these large, huge, softball-sized blooms. And no staking. Like, I love peonies. Peonies are my favorite, dare I say favorite, perennial. But you have to stake them. You got to do the peony rings. One rainstorm, they flop over. They're not the easiest to maintain. But if you can get those blooms on a shrub form of a peony that hold upright without all the staking and nonsense, man, sign me up. So anywho, the foliage is really attractive too. It's very dissected, so it almost gives you kind of like this palm fern-like appearance to it. And a pleasant surprise for me, because Cora Louise is one of my newer ones that I've introduced to the garden. It comes up bright burgundy. The young foliage of Cora Louise, unlike my other Itohs that I've got, is so stunning right now because it's emerged now probably 8 inches or so, and it is bright burgundy, and I have it planted in a sea of carex at its feet. So you've got that like green kind of basin and this beautiful emerging foliage. So I'd say the foliage is lovely as well, and gets a beautiful fall color to it too, that once we go through fall, it eventually turns to green, obviously, the foliage. And then when we get some cooler temperatures, it flushes burgundy as well. So, I was trying to think of dwarf spring flowering shrubs that actually have a bit going on a little bit later on in the season, because I think that's the knock against a lot of spring flowering anything. It's that, what does it look like after spring is gone? But yeah, so I went for it. And Carol, you were my inspiration, because I feel like we did something on like shade shrubs or something, and you picked an Itoh peony, and I was like, well, if she could do an Itoh peony as a shrub, I'm gonna do it too. Bringing it on home, Carol. We're bringing it on home with our last spring flowering dwarf shrub. What do you got?
Okay, so this one is one that I recently saw in a nursery. And let me tell you, it draws you in from many aisles away. It is double plague candy corn spirea. And that's Spirea japonica, another one of these names, NCSX1.
Okay.
All right. But double play candy corn. And I think candy corn is probably the shortened name. Zones 4 to 8. It gets 18 to 30 inches tall and wide, so it does stay nice and small. Unlike, there are some other colorful spireas that get much, much bigger. But this one likes, just like most of them, full sun, average, well-drained soil, not really particularly fussy about conditions. And what I think is really cool about this one is that it gets this brilliant red new growth in the spring, like the little shoots that come up. I put a photo in the show notes of this, which I got from Proven Winners, but the new growth is just like intensely candy apple red. And then as the leaves age, they get more like a pineapple yellow, like just a bright yellow. And throughout the season, as new growth pushes out, you'll have the yellow with the reddish or orange new growth on top of that. So it almost looks like it's flowering for a very long season. Its actual flowers are late spring. They're like a soft violet, purple, like a lot of spireas, and sort of that misty look, because I don't know what it is, the stamens or something. It's got a soft look to it. Very pretty, cute size, really carefree. I don't know. I think the only tip that I saw was that you can shear the flowers off after they're spent so that you get more of that new growth. But other than that, you really don't need to do anything to it. And unlike the forsythia, which would give you a pop of color like at a really specific time of year, this is one that you can stick in and get a pop of color that lasts for the entire season long.
That's awesome. And that foliage never like greens out. Like it doesn't go into boring green blob mode. It holds like kind of that yellow chartreusey foliage.
At most, it'll go chartreuse. I think if you put it in too much shade, you may get more of a chartreuse color. But if you keep it in full sun, which is what it really wants, then you should have that color all the way through the season.
Oh my God. Well, I've got Ogon spireas in my garden, and it sounds like it's that color, only, in a smaller package. And man, I tell you, that color, it's invaluable. So if you're getting dwarf spring flowers and that brilliant red new growth, and then it goes to that color, that's so, people love Ogon for a reason. That's awesome. All right, candy corn. I'm just going to remember candy corn. Yeah. And a pretty good zonal range on that too. Did you say 4?
4 to 8, yeah. So really, most of us can grow it all the way up to the Canadian border and beyond. Yeah, it's pretty tough. So
that's awesome.
I think it's worth a try.
And that's on your shopping list for this year.
I almost bought it. I ended up buying other things instead, but I really almost impulse bought this one because it looked so cool this time of year. Really, it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to bring it back to a plant that I want to be able to grow. So I think I've talked before about, in the cut flower episode that we did, I talked about a daphne, a hybrid daphne that was Daphne transatlantica, and I talked about eternal fragrance as the variety. I'm not going to talk about that today because I've got some insight that our expert that's coming up next is going to talk about that variety, eternal fragrance. So I'm going to talk about the other one of the Daphne family that is also supposedly tough as nails. Now, I haven't grown this specific variety, but I get this on good authority from Richie Steffen out in Seattle. He is a contributing editor for Fine Gardening, and Richie does not pull punches when it comes to plants. They get one try, and if they don't really take and do well, he kicks them out. He runs a botanic garden. He needs to, be tough love. And Jim's Pride is one that is a little bit older than Eternal Fragrance. And so again, that's Daphne X transatlantica, Jim's Pride, and it's zones 5 to 9, which is a little bit hardier for a Daphne as well. Most Daphnes fall in the zone 7 range, sometimes 6, but this is a much hardier Daphne, and it's because of that cross. It's because of that hybridization. A lot of people struggle to grow Daphnes, especially in areas with wet winters. So I think regardless that this Daphne is going to want good drainage, you're going to want to plant this on a berm or make sure that you're amending your soil to be a little bit more gravelly so it gets some good drainage during the winter. But it's gorgeous. It's semi-evergreen. So if you're in a colder, end of its zone in zones 5 and 6, it's going to lose some of these beautiful kind of rubbery green needles. If you're in the warmer zone, it's going to stay evergreen for you no matter what, but gets to be about 4x4 and is the most polite little shrub that you've ever seen. Just makes this little mound with kind of these rubbery stems. It's got a very interesting kind of texture, and you kind of scrunch on it and it's rubbery stems and kind of these like rubbery needles. It's very interesting. Into partial shade. It really wants partial shade. It doesn't want to be put in full blazing sun. It doesn't want to go, deep shade underneath a conifer. It wants that partial shade in average, well-drained soil. And then the main event, right? So April rolls around and these clusters of star-like white flowers open up, and the fragrance of a Daphne, if you thought a lilac smelled wonderful, which they do, you will be blown away by a Daphne. It is not an overpowering fragrance, but it is a light kind of, maybe root beer or vanilla fragrance to it. Just very, very lovely. Now it starts pushing blooms in April, May, depending on where in the country you live. And then this one puts on its big show, and then, the blossoms, the dead blossoms politely fall away. And then it's going to sporadically bloom all the way up into November. Now, that doesn't mean that it stays in bloom this whole time, but hey, you're walking along and you see this cool little green shrub that you planted, and then boom, there's a couple of fragrant flowers. I would put this right by a pathway. I would put this, right outside my front door. It's going to behave really well, so it's not going to block any, entryways or visitors coming down pathways, but you're going to be able to know when it throws out those fragrant blossoms that, it's not in the depths of the garden. You've really got it in a high traffic area. I just love a fragrant flowering plant. And so now you're getting spring flowering dwarf shrub that's also fragrant. And I would highly recommend Jim's Pride Daphne. This one is one, again, I haven't personally grown, but it is in the same family as Eternal Fragrance, which I guess we should kick it over maybe in a couple of minutes to our expert to see what she has to say about that one. And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter to talk about cheesecake?
Well, I think these podcast topics are getting out of hand, frankly. I mean, shrubs that flower in spring specifically and have dwarf in growth habit? How can there possibly be any plants that fit that super narrow niche? That's like asking for a cheesecake that's room temperature with cranberry frosting and a sugar cookie crust. But just when I think we've fallen over the edge here at Let's Argue About Plants, I'm pulled back to safety. It seems there are a lot of shrubs that possess this laundry list of requirements. And now that I've been schooled a bit on them, I think my appreciation for gardening has grown even more. In fact, I think I need a few spring blooming dwarf shrubs in my own landscape after hearing about all their wonderful characteristics. I've often shied away from woody plants because I don't have that much room in my foundation landscape. But miniaturized versions that also bloom during a time of year when we could all use a bit of cheering up after winter? Now that seems almost too good to be true. That's my takeaway from my time spent on this gardening podcast. There's always something new to learn. Just when you think it's all tulips and ornamental grasses, a new category or genre of plants comes up, and I'm left dumbstruck and impressed. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I think those people never stumbled upon the world of podcasts, where you can learn new tricks of various trades every minute of every hour. Now, please excuse me. I need to go listen to the latest episode of the Women in Waders podcast. I'm thinking of taking up fly fishing this summer, and I hear that's a good place to get inspired. Now, I wonder if it's possible to get a pair of frog togs in a 34 long.
Carol, Peter really pokes fun at us sometimes on these topics. I mean, he likened our topic today to a very specific cheesecake flavor with specialized crust and frosting. I mean, that guy, I think he just likes needling us.
Yeah, but in this case, it might not be unwarranted. I don't know.
You might be right. Let's see what our expert has to say. I think that she likes the topic at least.
I'm Julie Lane Gay, the former owner of Quail Hollow, a nursery specializing in climbers and perennials, and now a custom propagator and garden writer in Vancouver, British Columbia. Our climate is similar to Seattle's, with winters that are more wet than cold. By the thermometer, we're in zone 8, but because of our 60 inches of rain each year, we not only want your pity, we garden as if we're in zone 7. In my early years of gardening, I was embarrassingly confident you could keep shrubs and vines smaller than their stated size simply by either pruning more dramatically or growing the plant in a pot. Why would I need a small-sized shrub if I could just put a lilac in a 3-foot square space and prune it hard come June? Slowly, I caught on. Shrubs don't like being contained to fit my needs. Over time, they stop flowering, then their immune system weakens, and then they die. Thankfully, with the popularity of smaller gardens, there's been a fantastic increase of truly good small shrubs. Not ones that look like they got squished into a Ziploc bag and pulled out again, but many that are truly 2 and 3 feet tall. One of the best small spring shrubs actually starts flowering, at least in the Pacific Northwest, in January. Dwarf sweetbox, or in the Latin, Sarcococa hookeriana variety humilis, is an understated workhorse. It ticks more boxes than most plants I know. Just under 2 feet tall, it thrives both as a solitary plant in a shrub border or as a hedge. You can clip it or tidy it as casually as you like. I cut mine back in April, but you can skip pruning altogether. The fragrance is mysterious. Every year on a cold February day, my husband seems to come home from work and ask me, "What's that plant that smells so good when you walk out the north side of my building?" The small green leaves are in abundance, but he can rarely find the flowers. The wispy white blooms, not more than an inch tall, pop up between the stem and the leaves, and while they're often hidden, their fragrance wafts through the air as if they were highly visible. A small bouquet on the windowsill can sweeten the scent of an entire room. But it's a toss-up as to whether the highlight of Dwarf Sweetbox is its fragrance or its flexibility. This is truly the friend that never complains. You can grow it in full shade or part sun, and after a year or two in the ground, you can forget to water it. Dwarf Sweetbox looks great and thrives in a pot by the front door, evergreen, sturdy, tidy but still lush. I notice gardeners are increasingly using Sweetbox where they might have viewed boxwood. It's more disease-resistant, faster growing, and has the added bonus of small, fragrant flowers. Lastly, Sweetbox is also friendly. The glossy dark green leaves combine effortlessly with Lenten hellebores and big root geraniums, and together the three can provide flowers from December until June. If Dwarf Sweetbox has been my easygoing plant, Daphne has been my scary one. I tried to grow this fragrant legend at least 3 times, and each time it started well and died quickly. When a gardener I admire said to me, "Yeah, nearly everyone has at least one failed Daphne story," I realized I wasn't alone. But about 10 years ago, Daphne Eternal Fragrance arrived in our nurseries and was a game changer. It quickly attained celebrity status. It's beautiful, exceptionally fragrant, and easy to grow. It's hardy to zone 6 or about 5 degrees. It does well in some shade or full sun. Bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds seem to love eternal fragrance at least as much as I do. It grows to about 24 to 30 inches tall and spreads to about 3 feet or a bit wider. After 10 years, mine is nearly 4 feet across. This Daphne is not a fast grower, but neither is it a slow one. I've seen it grown as an informal hedge, and I've seen it in big pots by the front doors of a classy hotel. The 1.5-inch long narrow leaves are dark green and sturdy. The 1-inch flowers are clustered tight with pink buds opening into white flowers with an orange eye. In Vancouver, Eternal Fragrance starts blooming in early April, and this past summer it offered the occasional bloom right into September. Daphne looks good with all sorts of neighbors. At the feet of larger hydrangeas or rhododendrons, or as in my garden, surrounded by the Gerald Darby iris and white-horned violets beneath my favorite crabapple tree. I've never pruned mine, just cut out the occasional wayward or grumpy stem. The only two things I've noticed this daphne does not like, and I can hardly blame it, is simply sitting buried in snow for more than a few days and constant cold winds. Lastly, I've always liked the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, which some say means understated elegance. But if I have it right, it's more than that. Wabi-sabi is the notion of urging each of us to see the beauty with its imperfection, to value imperfections in something for how they make a bowl or a wood carving or a garden more beautiful, more itself. All that to say, when there was a new viburnum shrub named wabi-sabi, I was instantly intrigued. Several months later, I saw this dwarf double-file viburnum under a Japanese maple, gently trailing, almost draping over a stone wall. It was like a lacy white tablecloth with texture and spunk. It was stunning, and all I could think was, where was the imperfection? This cascading shrub is a petite form of the 8 to 10 foot tall double-file viburnum, Viburnum plicatum tomentosum, which I consider to be a great shrub for its wedding cake-like silhouette, think rectangular tiers getting smaller as it goes upward, and lacy white flowers that arrive in May and often last till July. Double-file viburnum is drought-tolerant, has great fall color, and it's the perfect shrub for a small clematis to shimmy its way across in early July. Viburnum wabi-sabi is a quarter the size. It grows to 2 feet tall, maybe 30 inches, but it spreads out to 4 to 5 feet. With its lacy flowers that vary in size, it's both beautiful and playful, and it too flowers from May to July, is drought-tolerant, and its leaves turn burgundy come October. It's cold-hardy to zone 5, and it's equally happy in full sun or a half a day of shade, even on the edge of the woodland, though its fall color is better in the sun. Wabi-sabi looks wonderful on the edge of a path in the front of a border, and it has an understated elegance of its own.
All right. Well, I'll give it to Julie. She did a far better job talking about eternal fragrance daphne than I could have ever done.
What a great plant. Now I want to grow it. Holy cow.
I know, I do too. And hey, folks, we may or may not have mentioned that Julie did write an article for us on dwarf shrubbery, and she did mention eternal fragrance, but she mentioned several other really awesome plants. So we're going to put that link in our show notes as well to Julie's article in Fine Gardening about dwarf flowering shrubs. And now, what more could you want? We've now probably, between all those links, we've given you like 50 dwarf spring flowering shrubs. So you're welcome, audience.